Somewhere in the Western Pacific right now, the ocean is quietly building something that meteorologists are already warning could become the next major test for a region that has already been battered twice this year. It is not a hurricane in the Atlantic. It is not a storm system anyone in North America is currently watching on the news. It is developing far out in open water, northwest of the tiny island of Yap, in exactly the kind of environment that has, twice already in 2026, turned a disorganized cluster of thunderstorms into a Category 5 monster in a matter of days. As of Monday, July 13th, the Joint Typhoon Warning Center designated the system Invest 97W and issued a tropical cyclone formation alert, meaning forecasters believe a tropical depression could form within 24 hours. The Japan Meteorological Agency has already gone a step further, classifying the disturbance as a tropical depression outright. The Philippine Weather Agency, PAGASA, is calling it a medium chance of formation within the same window. 3 separate national meteorological agencies watching the same patch of ocean, all reaching the same conclusion at nearly the same time. That kind of agreement across agencies does not happen for storms that are not worth taking seriously. So today we are breaking down everything currently known about this system, why scientists are drawing direct comparisons to 2 of the most destructive typhoons the Pacific has produced this year, what the atmospheric conditions actually look like right now, and why 2026 has already become one of the most dangerous typhoon seasons in half a century. No filler, no speculation beyond what the data supports, just what the forecasters, the satellites, and the ocean itself are telling us right now. If you want to know the moment this system gets officially named, make sure you are subscribed with notifications on, because based on how the last 2 systems behaved, the window between quiet disturbance and catastrophic storm could be shorter than anyone expects. Let's get into it. To understand why meteorologists are watching Invest 97W with this level of urgency, you have to understand what 2026 has already done to the Western Pacific Typhoon Basin. This has been, by multiple measures, one of the most active seasons in living memory. According to tracking, data compiled through mid-June, 12 tropical cyclones had already formed in the Western Pacific Basin by that point in the year, making it the most active start to a season since 1976, essentially half a century of typhoon records. Every single month of 2026 so far has produced at least one named tropical cyclone, something that has not happened since the 2015 season. The first named storm of the year, Nakayan, formed in mid-January, the earliest start to a Pacific typhoon season since Pabuk kicked off the 2019 season. This is not a normal year, and scientists studying the basin are being direct about why. Sea surface temperatures across the Western Pacific have been running consistently above historical averages, providing the raw fuel that tropical systems need to intensify, and a developing El Niño pattern is reshaping the entire dynamic of where and how these storms form. Under El Niño conditions, typhoons in the Western Pacific tend to develop farther east than usual, which sounds like a small detail, but actually matters enormously. Water means more opportunity to reach Category 4 or Category 5 intensity before anyone on a coastline is dealing with its effects. Meteorologist Jeff Masters, writing for Yale Climate Connections, has specifically noted that El Niño year typhoons, forming farther east, give storms a greater chance of reaching Category 5 intensity by the time they threaten populated areas. That is, exactly the pattern that played out twice already this year. In April, Super Typhoon Sinlaku formed under these same conditions and rapidly intensified into a catastrophic Category 5 storm, at one point registering sustained winds of 185 miles per hour and a central pressure as low as 890 millibars, among the lowest pressures ever recorded for a storm, striking the Mariana Islands. Its less favorable conditions further along its projected path. Sinlaku killed 17 people and caused approximately $1.5 billion in damage across Guam and the Northern Marianas, according to figures reported by Yale Climate Connections. Then, in early July, barely 3 months later, Super Typhoon Bavi formed in a nearly identical environment, underwent one of the fastest intensification sequences meteorologists have tracked all year, and reached peak sustained winds estimated by the Joint Typhoon Warning Center at around 180 miles per hour, with a central pressure near 901 millibars, making it the 3rd storm to reach Category 5 intensity anywhere on Earth in 2026, following Sinlaku in April and tropical. Cyclone Horatio in the southern Indian Ocean back in February. Bavi's eye passed directly over the island of Rota, home to roughly 1,500 people, subjecting the small island to a direct hit from one of the most powerful tropical cyclones the basin has produced this year. The storm then tracked across the Philippine Sea, brushed past Taiwan, struck Japan's southern Ryukyu Islands, and ultimately made landfall in China's Zhejiang province on July 11th, prompting the evacuation of more than 1.7 million people in that province alone, with additional evacuations in Fujian, Shanghai, and Beijing, pushing the total displaced population well past 2 million people across the region. Bavi's rampage through the Philippines also triggered landslides that killed at least 18 people, according to Philippine officials, with 14 more left missing at the time local authorities gave their final counts. That is the backdrop Invest 97W is forming against. Not an isolated weather event, but the third act in a season that has already produced 2 Category 5 storms and killed dozens of people across multiple countries. Right now, Invest 97W sits at roughly 11 degrees north, 137 degrees east, a position the Joint Typhoon Warning Center placed approximately 110 nautical miles northwest of Yap, as of their advisory issued at 2030 UTC on July 13th. Satellite imagery shows what forecasters describe as a mostly obscured, elongated, and relatively disorganized low-level circulation, with the most active thunderstorm activity concentrated on the western flank of the system. That might sound like a system that is still far from becoming a threat, and in one sense, that is accurate. This is not yet a named storm. It is not yet a tropical depression. But the environment surrounding it is the part that has meteorologists paying close attention, because it is nearly a textbook match for the conditions that turned both Sinlaku and Bavi into Category 5 monsters earlier this year. According to the JTWC's environmental analysis, Invest 97W is sitting in a zone of low to moderate vertical wind shear, somewhere in the range of 15 to 20 knots, combined with sea surface temperatures measured between 29 and 30 degrees Celsius, roughly 84 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. For context, tropical cyclones typically need sea surface temperatures of at least 26 degrees Celsius to sustain development, and the warmer the water beyond that threshold, the more energy is available for a storm to draw on. Water in the high 20s to 30 degrees Celsius range is considered highly favorable, essentially high-octane fuel for a developing system. The JTWC's outlook also notes moderate poleward and equatorward upper-level outflow, the mechanism that allows a storm to efficiently vent the rising warm air at its center, which is one of the 3 critical ingredients meteorologists look for when assessing rapid intensification potential alongside warm water and low wind shear. All 3 of those ingredients are currently present around Invest 97W. That is precisely the combination that took Bavi from a barely organized tropical storm to a Category 5 super typhoon in approximately 48 hours during the first days of July. A transformation so fast, it qualified several times over as rapid intensification, which is technically defined as an increase in maximum sustained winds of at least 35 miles per hour within a 24-hour period. Global forecast models are currently showing some disagreement about exactly how this will unfold, which is worth being transparent about rather than glossing over. The GFS, ECMWF, and NavGIM models have shown scenarios where the system consolidates rapidly over the next 24 hours before potentially weakening within 48 hours as it interacts at the same time. Ensemble. Model guidance has indicated the possibility of the system tracking northwestward before curving northeastward while gradually losing organization. In plain terms, there's genuine uncertainty in the models right now about whether Invest 97W becomes a short-lived tropical depression that fizzles out or organizes into something that tracks toward more populated areas with additional time over warm water to intensify. This is the exact stage where a storm's fate becomes genuinely unpredictable. And it is also exactly the stage where both Sinlaku and Bavi were significantly underestimated by early model guidance, before both systems explosively intensified beyond what forecasters initially expected. The Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, and China have all been flagged in current travel and weather advisories as regions that should be monitoring the system's development closely, given the Western Pacific's status as the most active and highest intensity tropical cyclone basin on the planet. This is also where the human dimension of this story becomes impossible to separate from the meteorology. If Invest 97W does organize into a significant tropical cyclone and tracks anywhere near the Mariana Islands, Guam, Taiwan, or coastal China, it would be hitting communities that are still in the middle of recovering from 2 catastrophic storms within the same calendar year. The northern Mariana Islands, struck first by Sinlaku in April and then subjected to a direct eyewall passage from Bavi in early July, still had sections of Tinian and Saipan without fully restored electricity heading into the second storm. Emergency shelters that filled past capacity during Bavi's approach had barely been decommissioned. The Commonwealth Utilities Corporation was still working through infrastructure repairs from Sinlaku when Bavi's outer bands arrived. China, for its part, has now been struck by 2 significant tropical systems within roughly a week of each other, with Tropical Storm Maysak making landfall in Guangxi province around July 3rd, killing dozens of people according to reports, followed by Bavi's landfall in Zhejiang just over a week later. If a third system develops and turns toward any of these same regions, the compounding effect on infrastructure, emergency resources, and simple human endurance is not something that resets to zero between storms. It stacks. That is the actual danger buried inside a story about wind speeds and pressure readings, the fact that the same relatively small set of islands and coastal provinces keep absorbing hit after hit within the same few months, with less and less time to recover between each one. Scientists studying the form are increasingly likely to reach major intensity, and they are reaching that intensity faster than historical patterns would predict. June 2026 was recorded as the second warmest June globally on record according to the Copernicus Climate Change Service, with global average surface temperatures running 1.39 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels for that month. It is the literal fuel source sitting underneath every single one of these systems as they form, and it is why meteorologists tracking Invest 97W are not simply watching a routine tropical disturbance. They are watching it against the backdrop of a basin that has already demonstrated twice in the span of 3 months that current ocean conditions are capable of turning a barely organized cluster of thunderstorms into a Category 5 super typhoon in under 72 hours. Dr. Marshall Shepard, a prominent atmospheric scientist who has been tracking this year's Pacific season closely, has pointed out that while the Atlantic hurricane season has been unusually quiet in 2026, that quietness has masked just how extraordinarily active the Western Pacific has become, with 3 separate Category 5 equivalent storms already recorded globally by early July, a pace that outstrips typical seasonal averages by a significant margin. That framing matters because it corrects a common blind spot. A lot of storm coverage in North America defaults to Atlantic hurricanes as the benchmark for what a dangerous season looks like, but the Western Pacific Basin is, by almost every meteorological measure, the most active and highest intensity tropical cyclone basin on the entire planet, producing storms that regularly exceed anything the Atlantic generates in a typical year. So when scientists say the strongest storm on Earth right now could be forming, they are not exaggerating for effect. They are describing an actual, measurable pattern that is held for months. The rapid intensification question deserves particular attention here because it is the single factor most responsible for how dangerous storms like Sinlaku and Bavi became before communities had time to fully process the threat. Research compiled by Climate Central examining Atlantic tropical cyclones from 1980 through 2025 found that 190 storms in that period underwent rapid intensification, and nearly a quarter of those, 46 storms, hit an even more extreme threshold, getting at least 58 miles per hour in sustained winds within a single 24-hour period. While that specific data set covers the Atlantic, the underlying physical mechanism, warmer oceans providing more available energy for rapid strengthening, applies globally, and the Western Pacific in 2026 has provided about as clear a real-world demonstration of that mechanism as meteorologists have seen in years. The danger of rapid intensification is not abstract. It is entirely about time. A storm that takes 5 or 6 days to gradually build toward peak intensity gives emergency planners, shipping operators, airlines, and residents an extended runway to prepare, evacuate vulnerable areas, and secure infrastructure. A storm that jumps from tropical depression to Category 5 in 48 hours compresses all of that decision-making into a fraction of the time, and it is exactly the scenario forecasters are watching for with Invest 97W given the current sea surface, temperatures, and wind shear profile surrounding it. This is also precisely why meteorological agencies have gotten more aggressive about issuing early alerts on systems that have not even reached tropical depression status yet. The Tropical Cyclone Formation Alert issued for Invest 97W on July 13th is not a definitive prediction that the system will become the next major typhoon of the season. It is a structured warning that the ingredients required for that outcome are currently present and that the situation could change rapidly. That distinction matters, and it is worth sitting with for a moment rather than rushing past it, because it is the difference between responsible forecasting and fear-driven speculation. Nobody currently knows with certainty whether oceanic environment surrounding this system right now checks nearly every box associated with rapid strengthening, in a season that has already proven twice over that those conditions can produce catastrophic results with very little warning. For residents across the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, Guam, and the Northern Marianas, all regions that have already been directly affected by tropical cyclones earlier this year, the practical guidance from meteorologists remains consistent regardless of exactly how Invest 97W evolves over the coming days. Monitor official updates from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the Japan Meteorological Agency, and Pagasa, rather than relying on secondhand reports or social media speculation, since these agencies update their assessments multiple times per day as new satellite and reconnaissance data comes in. Keep in mind that systems in this basin have demonstrated the capacity to intensify dramatically within a 48 to 72-hour window, meaning a disturbance that looks unremarkable today can become a significant threat by the weekend. And perhaps most importantly, understand that recovery capacity across this region has been strained by the events of the past several months, meaning even a moderately strong system arriving in the wrong place could have an outsized impact simply because the infrastructure and emergency resources that would normally absorb that kind of event have not been given time to reset. The story of Invest 97W right now is fundamentally a story about uncertainty managed through preparation rather than panic, which is exactly the same lesson that came out of Bavi's approach to the Mariana Islands just weeks ago, when advanced warning and community preparedness resulted in 0 confirmed fatalities across Guam and the Northern Marianas, despite a direct Category 5 equivalent hit on the island of Rota. That outcome was not, continues to organize over the coming hours and days. That same principle applies. Watch the updates, take the early alerts seriously, even when the system still looks disorganized on satellite, and understand that in the Western Pacific in 2026, the gap between a quiet disturbance and a catastrophic super typhoon has repeatedly proven to be measured in hours, not weeks. That brings us to the question everyone watching this story ultimately wants answered. And it is worth being honest that nobody, not the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, not the Japan Meteorological Agency, not the most sophisticated ensemble models running on supercomputers right now, can tell you with certainty exactly where Invest 97W will be or how strong it will be 7 days from today. What can be said with confidence is what the pattern of 2026 has already taught anyone paying close attention to this season. 12 tropical cyclones formed in the Western Pacific. By mid-June alone, the most active start to a season in 50 years. 3 separate storms have already reached Category 5 intensity somewhere on the planet this year, a rate that outpaces typical seasonal norms. Sea surface temperatures across the basin have remained persistently elevated, and a developing El Niño pattern continues to push storm formation further east, giving systems more open water and more time to intensify before they ever reach a coastline. Every one of those factors that fueled Sinlaku in April and Bavi in July is still present in the Western Pacific right now, sitting underneath Invest 97W as it slowly organizes northwest of Yap. That is not fear-mongering. That is simply what the data shows, and it is exactly why meteorologists across multiple independent agencies flagged this system on the same day, within hours of each other, using nearly identical language about favorable development conditions. There is also a broader question sitting underneath all of this that goes beyond any single storm, and it is one that scientists studying tropical cyclones globally have been increasingly willing to say out loud rather than hedge around. The total number of tropical cyclones forming each year has not shown a dramatic uptick when measured against long-term historical averages. What has changed, consistently, across ocean basins, and understand about why storms like Sinlaku, Bavi, and potentially the system currently designated Invest 97W keep catching communities that sit directly in the path of the most active tropical cyclone basin on Earth, and that have already been tested twice this year by storms whose intensity outpaced what forecasters initially projected. The underreported part of this story, the part that rarely gets the same attention as wind speed records and satellite imagery, is what happens to a community's capacity to absorb the next disaster after it has already absorbed 2. Infrastructure does not repair itself on the same timeline that storms form. Power grids damaged in April were still being rebuilt when a second storm arrived in July. Emergency shelters that filled past capacity once do not automatically expand their capacity for the next event. Federal and international disaster relief resources committed to one recovery effort are not instantly available to redeploy the moment another storm appears on the horizon. This is the quiet, unglamorous risk multiplier sitting behind every headline about a new system developing in the Pacific, and it is precisely why a storm that might look moderate on paper, one that never reaches Category 5, can still represent a serious threat if it arrives in a place that has not been given time to recover from what came before it. If Invest 97W does organize and track toward any of these already strained regions, the danger will not simply be a function of its peak wind speed. It will be a function of how much resilience those communities have left to draw on. For anyone in the path of this developing system, or anyone simply trying to stay informed about what is unfolding in the Western Pacific right now, the practical steps remain straightforward and worth repeating clearly. Follow official advisories from the Joint Typhoon Warning Center, the Japan Meteorological Agency, and Pagasa directly, rather than relying on second-hand summaries, since these agencies issue updated assessments multiple times daily as new data comes in from satellites and reconnaissance aircraft. treat early formation alerts seriously, even when a system still looks weak and disorganized on satellite imagery, because both Sinlaku and Bavi demonstrated have an evacuation and communication plan in place before conditions deteriorate, not after. Since both major storms this year showed that communities with pre-established shelter plans and clear public communication were able to avoid mass casualties even when facing direct hits from historically powerful systems, and understand that in a season already defined by back-to-back catastrophic storms hitting the same vulnerable geography, every new system deserves attention regardless of how it initially looks on a satellite loop, because the Western Pacific in 2026 has made clear twice over that initial appearances can be deeply misleading. What happens next with Invest 97W remains genuinely uncertain, and that uncertainty is the honest, unembellished state of the science right now rather than a gap to be filled with speculation. It may organize into the next named storm of the season and track toward major population centers. It may weaken and dissipate over the next several days the way other invests have done earlier this season. What is not uncertain is the environment it is forming in, an ocean running warmer than historical norms, a typhoon season already historically active, and a string of communities across the Philippines, Taiwan, Japan, Guam, and the Northern Marianas that have already been tested this year and are watching the horizon again. The lesson from Sinlaku and Bavi was never really about wind speed records or satellite measurements. It was about what happens when warnings are taken seriously early, when preparation happens before a storm feels urgent rather than after, and when communities that have already been watching the forecast, and if you are anywhere near the current advisory zones, follow the official guidance from your local meteorological agency starting now. Not once a name and a category number make it feel real.